Howdy, do you like animation? Me too. How about games? Me 3. But combine the two together and all too often it's like combining ice cream and pizza. When they're eaten apart, they're amazing. But stick them together and, well, they're just awful. But today, I'd like to look back at the exceptions in animation-based games. The good ones. And of course, I'll cover the most terrible of all the horrible, no good, very bad games. So here's what I consider the top 5 best and worst animation-based games. Oh, also, we'll be excluding Japanimation games, otherwise they just take the whole list. Alright, let's go! And obviously, starting with the 5th worst, Shrek Super Party. Holy cow! This thing makes the underside of my mud flaps look attractive.
Princess Fiona wants to be rescued by her one true love.
How did they manage to make an even more pug-fugly party game than Nickelodeon Party Blast? So, are you ready for the most hellishly terrible, drowned-out, sad Mario Party clone in the history of the galaxy?
Ready, set, go!
It's like they took the most generic cutout of a party game and then just pasted Shrek faces over the top. Creepy Five Nights at Freddy's Shrek-themed faces that have pupils that gaze through us and into the great abyss, while surrounded by sickly brownish-green backgrounds. What I'm saying is this thing makes ugly things look ravishing by comparison. The word party is grossly misused in this title, because the word party generally indicates some level of mirth and joy. But that is not what we receive here. Not a single moment did I feel I was ever in the Shrek universe. These characters look like they're about to welcome us into the gates of hell.
Uh-oh, Lord Farquaad, off to the evil bog!
Every character bobbles along with uncanny faces leering at you like you just passed gas in an elevator. So once we choose our abomination of nature, we compete with these malformed homunculus hydras to see who can get the most points. And it's truly choose your own poison for which party game you wish to be played. To choose our fated game, we travel across the board. Though if you mistook the board for a toilet backed up roaring sewerage drain, I wouldn't blame you. There's 30 minigames here that make up our duels and challenges. And they're so painfully easy that unless your opponent is a trained dolphin, they should have no problem at all finishing them.
Congratulations, donkey!
But then I guess the controller will get all wet. But to Shrek Party's credit, at least the games are playable. But overall, chances are playing Shrek Super Party will result in any party you had going instantly stopping. The gameplay is so agonizingly slow, simplistic, and boring that anyone within 50 yards may well feel bummed out for the rest of the day. And for the 5th best animation-based game, Family Guy: Back to the Multiverse. A game based on the Family Guy Stewie Brian travel episodes? That's a great idea. Unlike The Simpsons, Family Guy has rarely delved into video games. The series did have a game on the PS2, PSP, and Xbox in 2006, but it wasn't particularly crash hot. On the other hand, Family Guy Back to the Multiverse is a solid attempt at building the game universe of Family Guy. The story is that Bertram, Stewie's eviler half-brother, arrives at Quahog from another dimension, where Stewie hadn't yet slain him in the past.
Stewie Griffin! My God, Bertram! But how is this possible? I killed you!
He intends on creating an army from the multiverse in order to destroy Stewie's universe entirely. With no other choices, Stewie and Brian travel through the multiverses.
Okay, I think I got it.
The plot takes a great approach with its concept, borrowing the ideas from one of the best episodes of the entire series, and using it for an entire video game. Not only that, but each multiverse has many nods to the more absurd moments from the series, such as a dimension ruled by the Amish, or one where Santa begins creating weapons instead of toys.
It looks as though in this universe, Santa is some kind of industrial mercenary.
The story takes full advantage of the insane concepts that multiverses allow them to explore. As for the gameplay, it's a third-person shooter, a bit like something like Fortnite, allowing for very free-feeling gameplay. Not only that, but characters have access to a variety of weapons instantly, which allows for easy switching of both weapons and characters. Characters not only have access to firearms, but also a variety of weird items like Pawtucket Brew and Stewie's diapers, Ew. Anyway, the levels have similar sort of objectives to other shooters. Pretty straightforward stuff, like the characters progress to a certain part of the map or have to destroy certain things to stop Bertram's plot. You can tackle these missions alone, but the game features both cooperative and competitive multiplayer, and you can easily jump in during most of the game. While the gameplay is all around pretty accessible and fun, the presentation isn't far behind either. While Family Guy's art style doesn't translate the best to 3D, the characters and environments mimic the show's art style surprisingly well in a 3D space.
Arrgh. Arrgh.
And for the fourth worst, Shark Tale the game. Shark Tale has a reputation of sorts. A reputation of being, to many, the worst DreamWorks film in the studio's history. So already, my expectations are somewhere below sea level and sinking. Yet somehow, Shark Tale the game even manages to fail my bottom-rung deep-sea garbage expectations of it. It fails to offer anything engaging, interesting, or even functional to players. The game somewhat follows the plot of the film in that it has similar themes, but the actual events that take place are very different from the original movie.
Get your scally carcass out of bed!
Whoa, lady! That is no way to wake a fish!
The game follows Oscar as he's just been evicted from his home. Well, points for originality, I guess. But the gameplay is a nonsensical mishmash of whatever the developers felt like dumping into the game. We start with a minigame where Oscar has to catch the belongings that the repo fish are throwing out the window. Then he has to explore the streets of the city and fight random fish. Jeebus, really? We wonder why he was evicted.
I warned you! You misran again, and I caught a repo fish! Take it away, boys!
We just get everything. A run-of-the-mill rhythm minigame, we run to his workplace, a horrible stealth action ensues, and so on. Where's the direction? What gameplay even is this? The game's identity crisis is the worst aspect, since it adopts so many styles of gameplay, yet ultimately fails in every single one of them, spectacularly. And these controls are a major pain as well. You know, you'd think swimming would be pretty easy in a fish game. But no, swimming sections feel slippery and frustrating to control. Precision is just something beyond our hopes in this lousy game. And presentation-wise, no surprise, the game is terrible. Just look at this mess. The game has an automatic handicap with the movie's already creepy art style, but somehow, this game makes the style even worse.
The Master Shark Blaster! The Wasteland Disaster!
The fish's faces look uncanny and off-putting in a way that horror games could only dream of achieving. Oh, and how about that music? Songs like Don't Worry, You Can't Touch This, and Bad Boys, of all things, can be repeatedly heard while playing the game, over and over. So if that doesn't sound appealing to you either, you'll have an even more wretched time playing this. With a game offering nothing of substantial quality and simply being a poorly thought out soup of failed concepts, I don't think Shark Tale the game's worth any of your time. And the fourth best animation-based game is South Park, The Stick of Truth, and The Fractured But Whole. You know, you'd never believe it nowadays, but once upon a time, South Park had a really troubled history in game making. All of the South Park licensed games were either poorly made or were outright cancelled before release. But that track record all changed in 2014, with the release of South Park, Stick of Truth. Obsidian Entertainment is renowned for their amazingly gripping RPG stories. My favorite of their stories is Knights of the Old Republic 2. In fact, it's probably the most memorable game story I ever played.
To believe in an ideal is to be willing to betray it. It is something no Sith or Jedi has ever truly learned.
And here, they do a fantastic job translating both the art style and the humor of South Park into an interactive experience. And at the end of the day, both these games made me feel like I was a new kid, stepping into the world of South Park for a spell. In fact, the name we're given is New Kid.
We're playing superheroes now, and you aren't a superhero, new kid, so off, okay?
And we get tons of fan service for longtime watchers of the show. The gameplay style of Stick of Truth is that of a classic JRPG. And although this probably should feel dated, it all felt surprisingly fresh and fun here. And in this role-playing game, it definitely feels like we're playing a role, as the game really makes me feel like an elementary school student again, playing pretend with other school students. But with the added darkness and chaos of South Park, and it gets an even darker edge the further we get into the game. We get the standard RPG affair here, We level up characters through fighting enemies, and we get more skills to unlock for a skill tree. Characters get new weapons, armor, can learn special moves, summons, and even control their flatulence as if it were magic. The town of South Park is also completely recreated here to serve as the game's map, making this the first time the entire town has ever been playable. The story of the game is focused on the mystical Stick of Truth, the ultimate MacGuffin of great power that is sought after in a great war between Cartman's group of human warriors and Kyle's group of elves. The federal government gets involved, alien invasions ensue, Nazi zombies, probes, it's a loony story. And the South Park style is recreated beautifully in this game, with it looking nearly identical to the style of the show. The music is also really gripping and immersive, with the soundtrack going for a more atmospheric style rather than something catchy. I included both the Stick of Truth and the Fractured But Whole in this list, as they're both similar in terms of gameplay and quality, with the latter having a superhero motif with gameplay that's more of a tactical RPG. Regardless, if you haven't already, these two South Park games are definitely worth giving a shot. And for the third worst, Kung Fu Panda: Showdown of Legendary Legends. A fighting game based on the Kung Fu Panda movies has so much potential behind it. After all, the films are focused on martial arts, and many of the characters are masters of it. So on the surface, this one really seemed like a no-brainer, yet somehow they still managed to botch it up. Kung Fu Panda pays homage to games like Smash Bros, and makes it considerably worse for the sake of being different. Like Smash Bros, up to 4 players can pick a character and battle each other on the game's maps. The big problem? How they control. Almost every character moves sluggishly, as if they weigh as much as a whale. The characters just slowly lumber around on their feet, leaving combat feeling like an absolute slog. Plus, because clearly the combat wasn't broken enough, there's a massive delay when you try to attack. And even worse is a lack of true impact that any of the attacks have. Whenever an attack lands, it feels empty, as if it just never connected at all. It doesn't feel even slightly cathartic to hit your opponent and then send them hurtling off the side of the screen. Instead, it's just like, I think something just happened. Another aspect we're really lacking here is the game's roster. While there are obvious picks such as the main characters and villains, the roster shows us severe limitations for a Kung Fu Panda fighting game. Have you ever wanted to play as a baby version of Po in a fighting game? I didn't think so, me neither. How about a random character we met in the second movie that we don't even remember? A story? Well, there is none, making it much easier to explain. In fact, there's only one cutscene in the entire game. In this cutscene, Po says he organized a showdown of legendary legends, and Master Shifu just agrees.
Really? Cool!
Everyone is already assembled. Let's just get on with it, shall we?
Oh come on, that was barely a cutscene at all. That was more just like an exposition dump. Thankfully, the game does have one saving grace, that being its presentation. Apart from dodgy character models like Po's strangely elongated neck, the environments do look really good for a PS3 game. The soundtrack isn't half bad too. It goes for a similar style to the film. When it comes to games based on DreamWorks movies, Legendary Legends just doesn't hold up. If you're looking for a good Kung Fu Panda game, I'd recommend going the first game instead. And I think the third best animation-based game is Shrek 2 the Game. Ooh, I love GameCube, one of my favorite consoles. I really can't rag on Shrek the series too much, not when they manage a fine spin-off like this. So far, Shrek's had a few attempts at making games based on the franchise, so far spanning 3 whole console generations. But much like the Shrek 2 movie remains a well-deserved fan favorite, the game version is also well remembered, and it's no wonder. Shrek 2 is a vibrant, wacky co-op game, where up to 4 players can control our characters from the film. Not only can you control the main characters, but also some side characters like Gingy, Little Red Riding Hood, and even the Big Bad Wolf. And each character comes equipped with both unique and shared abilities. For instance, Shrek can carry heavy objects, Gingy can throw a candy cane like a boomerang, and Donkey has a powerful kick, because he's a donkey. And it all feels very in spirit with the movie. The models look in line with the universe, and the atmosphere is very fairy tale-like. There's actually a lot this game experiments with, beyond what's normally expected of a 3D adventure game. Besides the on-foot gameplay, where characters collect treasure throughout the levels, there's also Hero Time, where characters get to play solo minigames featuring one of the 4 characters. While it's not exactly revolutionary, these bite-sized minigames do help give further depth and variety to the game. This never felt contrived or forced to me. It's a genuinely fun adventure with Shrek, Donkey, and Fiona, basically following a story of the abridged version of the movie. That being said, it's a GameCube game, so the presentation's still a bit rough. Although the characters look messy, the environments do still look quite pleasing. But overall, with fun co-op multiplayer, Shrek 2 manages to be a great time, especially if you have friends to play it with. But if you're like me and just playing by yourself, well, it's still a pleasant Shrek adventure. And the second worst animation-based game is Smurfs Dance Party. In my opinion anyway, the Smurfs itself is really overrated. In show, game, movie, in any capacity. Yet alone the horrible live-action Alvin and the Chipmunks movie clones they churned out. But despite them all being critically panned, these live-action Smurf films were massive successes. And with a big bad movie comes, of course, a big bad movie game tie-in. The Smurfs Dance Party is a pretty obvious Just Dance clone. The developers and publisher Ubisoft are actually the creators of the Just Dance series. So it appears they just took that game and gave it a smelly Smurfs coat of paint. It's like they smurfed all over the canvas. But seriously, all the Smurfs have this oddly unnatural look to them, with vacant, soulless eyes that barely blink. Even if I didn't hate the Smurfs' guts, I'm too creeped out to be charmed in any capacity by these things. And don't get me wrong, I do really enjoy a few Just Dance songs, but this is a really limited, sad excuse for a Just Dance game. The backgrounds are static, lifeless, and boring, and the Smurfs themselves just freak me out. Oh, and dear Jeebus, these songs stink. They could have given us pop songs, but no, let's give the poor audience some horrendous Smurf renditions of songs.
Smurf berries, delicious.
I didn't even like editing the footage because I find these songs so agonizingly tedious and bland. There's a few pop songs in there, but why would anyone want to see the Smurfs at all, except to see them squished by Gargamel? So for our Smurfs pop song renditions, instead of Who Let the Dogs Out, we have Who Let the Smurfs Out.
Who let the Smurfs out?
Are you scared yet? Because I sure am. Anyway, you trudge along, dancing with a Wii remote in hand along to the ear-grating 20-ish songs, mirroring the movements of the miserable blue eyesores in front of you. If, like me, you really enjoy the Just Dance games, any other version is way better than this one. If you are looking for a dance game that just so happens to feature the Smurfs, well, you have very oddly specific tastes. But this game is certainly for you. For everyone else, I just recommend trashing this thing. And the second best animation-based game is Scott Pilgrim vs. the World the Game. So while Scott Pilgrim isn't technically animated per se, it's still a comic series, and it did have an animated short on Adult Swim. So you know what, we're bending the rules a bit for this one, because Scott Pilgrim the Game is among my favorite classic beat-em-ups of all time. It's a game based on the comic series by Brian Lee O'Malley, but now turned into a tough throwback of old-school beat-em-ups on the NES and Super Nintendo. It even has a nice simple standalone plot of its own. The game's simply Scott and his friends fighting Ramona's 7 evil exes. So Scott and Ramona can be together. Straightforward enough. This is an effectively remastered 2D beat-em-up that really polishes this old game's style. Up to 4 people can play at once with characters from, no surprise, Scott Pilgrim. And these characters really feel in line with both the movie and the comic versions. In terms of gameplay, we've got our standard Ninja Turtles fare of heavy attacks and combos, but the game also employs the use of RPG elements, as characters level up with the more enemies they defeat. I really like this element as it makes knocking out enemies feel a bit more meaningful than other beat-em-ups out there. Be warned though, Scott Pilgrim's difficulty harkens back to the 80s era of gaming, where games were tough as nails. There is challenge in spades here, and the chances are you will be knocked out many times. That being said though, it was also really fun. Buying upgrades for characters is a requirement if you want to beat the game in a timely fashion. Like, I used to always buy the 10,000 push-ups book, as this would increase a strength stat tenfold. But it's also balanced just right so the game never feels unfair or cruel. So I did find myself enjoying replaying this game many times. All it takes is a little effort, luck, and a bit of patience, as should be the case with good RPGs or beat-em-ups. Even now, the presentation of this game remains amazing to me, and I still remember it vividly even a decade later. The sprite graphics translate the comic style perfectly into a retro art style. Even the soundtrack is splendid. The chiptune style complements the graphics, and the compositions themselves are just perfect. This game was once lost to time, but thankfully it's getting a re-release on the Nintendo Switch early 2021. So if you want, you can now give the game a shot if you missed it the first time, and I highly recommend you do. And before we get to the number ones, let's go through the quick honorable mentions. SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom. As if I could forget this game. SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom is not only among some of the most revered licensed games, but a big fan favorite of the GameCube, PS2, and Xbox. The controls for all three characters feel great, and the level design of the stages is stellar as well. Both for the original and the remake, the presentation is gorgeous. However, I did talk about this in my worst and best SpongeBob games video, so for the sake of variety, this will just be an honorable mention. The Simpsons Hit and Run. Similarly to SpongeBob, this game may be based on the cartoon series, but it's downright solid on its own. The game takes a similar approach to GTA, only with Simpsons characters in Springfield. It's evident the developers were fans of The Simpsons themselves, and they tried to create something as a tribute to the series itself. But again, this is another game I've already mentioned in my best and worst Simpsons games, so it's an honorable mention here. Anyway, on to the number ones. And I can say with reasonable certainty, the number one worst animation-based game is Bratz Rock Angels. Are you as painfully familiar with the Bratz line of dolls as I am? If not, I envy you. But they're basically a line of dolls similar to that of Barbie, only with the dolls' features being oddly accentuated to a near cartoonish level. Despite the concept sounding like it would be dead in the water, the toy line was a massive hit in the 2000s, and even spun off into other lines of toys, other merchandise, and even their own films. A lot of films. And shockingly, they even managed a truckload of game adaptations. And that's where Bratz Rock Angels and Bratz Forever Diamonds come in. Yes, I'm talking about this wrecking ball of a game too.
Hi, I'm Sasha from Bratz Magazine. I'd like to adopt a pet today.
Based on the films of the same name, they are 3D open-world adventure games where you can traverse the 4 locations of the game. Count them, 4. Oh yeah, and the game is awful. The gameplay consists of controlling one of the 4 Bratz girls as they travel across the game's maps, like the mall. A weirdly empty, lifeless mall. But don't worry, because our freakishly graphic Bratz characters control like train wrecks across the 3D environment. Their movement feels slippery, janky, and there's no precision in how you move these characters. The issue gets even worse when you try and use the game's inline skates, which make the girls' control somehow even worse. Thankfully, the game isn't a 3D platformer, or these issues would make the game unplayable.
I have a bad feeling about this.
The girls mainly do mindless fetch quests, such as buying items and talking to characters at certain locations. But playing this game makes me feel more like a hobo, because picking money off the street is not only something players can do, it is required to continue in the game. I haven't done this junk since Space Quest 4 in 1996. What's their excuse?
Alright, I can buy new makeup compacts from the compacts table around the corner.
So if doing menial random hobo tasks in a video game with choppily graphicked, badly controlled dolls sounds like something you'd enjoy, well, then here you go. The story? Well, it's about the 4 main girls starting their own business, where they publish teen magazines.
Now that's a plan. I'll go get some makeup.
With their motivation for this being that Jade was fired from her previous job for buying her boss a cheeseburger. Wait, what?
I got fired.
Couldn't she just give the burger to someone else? Never mind. And that is literally all there is to this story. It's almost as one-dimensional as our Bratz heroes here. And if that wasn't enough, what does any of this have to do with Rock Angels or the film based on it in any capacity? In fact, only the PC version actually bothers to follow the story of the film this game is supposedly based on. Every other version has this weak, fired cheeseburger story for some reason. Did they just forget the title of their own game? And again, despite being called Rock Angels, the game features almost zero music. In fact, I almost find this game kind of zen-like in its peace and quiet. It's actually kind of relaxing that way. I actually quite enjoy watching Wishing to Carl play this in the background, but I certainly wouldn't want to pick up a controller myself. Music can only be heard when purchasing items in shops and other sections, and I think you can also play some weird Kidz Bop CD through the girls' phones. But personally, I'd rather be basted in chocolate spread and fed to hungry lions. In almost all aspects, Bratz Rock Angels is a lifeless cash grab made to capitalize on the popularity of the Bratz brand. Not only that, but other games like Bratz Forever Diamonds and Bratz, the movie, are carbon copies of this game. If you are looking for a game with a focus on fashion, well, there are countless other games out there that would do much better than Bratz. And I think the #1 best animation-based game is Toy Story 2. I know, it's an odd choice, but this game was actually astonishingly ahead of its time. Toy Story 2 is an amazing collectathon 3D platformer. It's a bit like Banjo-Kazooie, only the game is set in the real world, as you control the pint-sized Buzz Lightyear through mundane locations turned into sprawling levels. Thanks to how small the characters are, traversing even the most boring place like a house or store has been made into a charming adventure. Buzz himself has a standard platformer moves you'd expect: double jump, attack, and laser beam, with him being able to unlock other new abilities as the game progresses. Unlocked abilities can be used to revisit old levels and access areas we previously couldn't. Not only that, but Buzz controls beautifully in a 3D space, with controls being really responsive and fluid for both the D-pad and the control stick. The objective of the game is simple: collect Pizza Planet tokens that are scattered in each level in order to progress through the game and save Woody. It loosely follows the plot of the film, while making some artistic choices. And while the main goal may not make a lot of sense, it certainly doesn't harm the gameplay. There's such a sense of momentum to these levels and flow that keeps the pace of the game going. And with all the possibilities for exploration through all the branching paths, there's a surprising amount to see and explore in these relatively small maps. I've heard a lot of fans say they'd really like to see a remastering of this for the PS4, because the presentation is simply phenomenal for a PlayStation 1 game. The colors are vibrant and pop, and they have an aesthetic similar to that of a toy. For a PlayStation 1 game, the look of the game is amazing. Even the soundtrack is fantastic. The OST is jam-packed with bouncy, life-filled, memorable music, very befitting of a colorful Toy Story adventure. It just amazes me that a game made in 1999 can still manage to be so fun to play even now. When it comes to video games based on licensed properties, Toy Story 2 is a classic that has managed to stand the ruthlessly non-stop test of time and still remain enjoyable to this day. The development team poured so much soul into the Toy Story 2 game, and it's visible even today. You know, normally, an animation-based game is the time where a developer's expected to do a lousy, who-cares job. So when we get some of these low-budget hidden gems that have somehow grown from pots of dirt, the developers deserve even more credit for their passion and efforts. And I hope it reminds some people it's okay to expect quality from our licensed games. And if you feel I missed a particularly good or bad animation-based game, then feel free to mention your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. The sound blares out with all the grace of a two-legged drunken elephant in a china shop.